Commander Torvak stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the holographic map floating before him. 17 star systems glowed green on the display. 17 civilizations that had bent their knees to the Velthari dominion. 17 victories without a single real battle. He was bored. The Velthari had perfected conquest over thousands of years. They would arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate their power by destroying a city or two, and then accept the surrender that always followed. No species was foolish enough to fight when they saw what the Dominion could do. Fear was the greatest weapon, and the Velthari had mastered it completely. A junior officer approached with a data tablet. "Commander, our scouts have found another inhabited world. Edge of the Orion Arm. They call it Earth." Torvak barely glanced at the information. A small blue planet. Population of 8 billion. Technology level. Primitive. They had not even developed faster than light travel. Their civilization was divided into hundreds of competing nations that spent most of their time arguing with each other. Some of them even pointed weapons at their own kind. "Pathetic," Torvak muttered. "A species that cannot even unite itself. Send a standard subjugation fleet. 12 cruisers should be more than enough." The officer hesitated. "Should you not lead the mission personally, Commander?" Torvak laughed. The sound echoed through the bridge, and other officers joined in nervously. "For this? A pre-warp civilization with projectile weapons? I would die of boredom before we reached orbit. Send Sub-Commander Vekris. Tell him to have it finished within 3 rotations. I want this planet's resources flowing to the Dominion before the month ends." The fleet departed the next cycle. Torvak did not bother to watch them go. He had more important matters to consider. The Dominion High Council was planning an expansion into the Andromeda sector, and he intended to lead that campaign. Earth was nothing. A footnote. A simple task for junior officers to practice on. He would realize his mistake soon enough. On the other side of the galaxy, on that small blue planet, a man named Kim Do-yun was drinking cold coffee and rubbing his tired eyes. He worked at the Gimhae Observatory in South Korea, spending his nights scanning the stars and cataloging distant objects. It was quiet work. Lonely work. Most nights, nothing interesting happened at all. But tonight was different. Do-yun noticed the anomaly at exactly 3:47 in the morning. A cluster of objects moving in formation, traveling at speeds that should have been impossible. At first, he thought his equipment was broken. He ran the numbers 3 times. He called his colleague in Australia. He contacted NASA. Within 6 hours, every major observatory on Earth had confirmed what he had found. Ships. Alien ships. Coming straight for Earth. The world did not react the way Do-yun expected. He had watched enough movies to imagine panic in the streets, riots, chaos, civilization collapsing overnight. But that was not what happened. Instead, something strange occurred. Something that had not happened in all of human history. People stopped fighting each other. The news spread across every screen on the planet. World leaders who had refused to speak for decades suddenly found themselves in emergency meetings. Old enemies sat at the same table. Ancient grudges were set aside. For the first time, humanity looked at itself not as Americans or Russians or Chinese or Koreans, but as one species facing a threat from beyond. In Seoul, a woman named Park Ji-soo received a phone call that changed her life. She had retired from the military 5 years ago after 30 years of service in the Special Forces. She had seen combat in places she was not allowed to talk about. She had led missions that did not officially exist. She had thought her fighting days were over. She was wrong. "General Park," the voice on the phone said. "The president needs you. The world needs you." Ji-soo looked out her window at the city she loved. Seoul glittered in the night, 20 million souls going about their lives, unaware that everything was about to change. She thought about her daughter, about her grandchildren, about all the people who would die if she failed. "Tell me what you need," she said. Within 48 hours. Park Jisoo was standing in the United Nations Emergency Command Center, facing a room full of the most powerful military leaders on Earth. Americans sat beside Russians. Chinese generals shook hands with their Japanese counterparts. It was impossible. It was necessary. "We have 72 hours before they arrive," Jisoo told them. Her voice was calm and steady. She had faced impossible odds before. "We cannot match their technology. We cannot match their firepower. But we can prepare. We can coordinate. And we can show them that Earth will not kneel." The plans came together faster than anyone thought possible. Nuclear weapons were repositioned. Satellite networks were linked. Every military force on the planet was placed under unified command for the first time in history. It was not enough. Everyone in that room knew it was not enough. But they did it anyway because doing nothing was not an option. The Valkyrie fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning. Commander Vekris positioned his 12 cruisers in high orbit and looked down at the blue planet below. His sensors showed primitive aircraft rising to meet him, missiles launching from the surface, radio signals flooding every frequency with what sounded like shouting and prayers. He smiled. This was always his favorite part. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Let them hear the voice of their new masters." His message was broadcast to every device on Earth, every television, every phone, every radio. 8 billion humans heard the same words at the same moment. "People of Earth, I am Sub-Commander Vekris of the Valkyrie Dominion. Your planet now belongs to us. You will surrender immediately and completely. Your governments will dissolve. Your militaries will disarm. Your resources will serve the Dominion. If you comply, you will be allowed to live as servants. If you resist, you will be destroyed. You have one rotation to respond. Choose wisely." The message ended. Vekris leaned back in his command chair, satisfied. In his experience, the silence that followed such ultimatums was filled with panic and desperate negotiations. Within hours, the planet's leaders would be fighting each other for the chance to surrender first. He waited. And then something happened that had never happened in the entire history of Valkyrie conquest. Every radio frequency on Earth activated at once. Every satellite, every transmitter, every communication device joined in a single broadcast. 8 billion voices speaking through their leaders, their soldiers, their scientists, their common people. The message was one word. The same word in every language. The same word from every nation. The same word from every human being on the planet. No. Vekris stared at his communication officer. What did they say? The officer checked his instruments 3 times before answering. They said no, Sub-Commander. All of them. They refused. Vekris felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He did not recognize it at first because it was so unfamiliar. It was confusion. It was uncertainty. It was the first small seed of fear. He pushed it down and gave the order that would begin the bloodiest war the galaxy had ever seen. Target Soul. Show them what happens to those who refuse the Dominion. The plasma bombardment began, and humanity's true test started with fire falling from the sky. The first plasma bolt struck the heart of Seoul at 9:14 in the morning. The blast was brighter than the sun. Buildings that had stood for 100 years turned to ash in seconds. The shockwave shattered windows 30 kilometers away. People who had been walking to work, drinking coffee, holding their children's hands, simply ceased to exist. But then something happened that Sub-Commander Vekris did not expect. Deep beneath the Swiss mountains, in a facility that had spent decades smashing atoms together, a woman named Yoon Minji watched her screens flash red. She had not slept in 2 days. Her hands shook from too much caffeine and not enough hope. Around her, scientists from 12 different countries worked in desperate silence, trying to do in hours what should have taken years. "It's not ready," her colleague said. "We need more time." Minji looked at the newsfeed showing Seoul burning. She thought about her parents, who lived in that city. She thought about her friends from university. She thought about millions of people dying while she stood here worrying about being ready. "Fire it," she said. The particle accelerators around the world activated. Simultaneously, Geneva, Illinois, Japan, China. They had been designed to explore the mysteries of physics, not to fight aliens. But Minji had spent 48 sleepless hours reprogramming them, linking them together, turning them into something new. The second plasma bolt from the Vulturi fleet hit an invisible wall in the upper atmosphere. The energy scattered across the sky like lightning, spreading harmlessly into space. The third bolt did the same. The fourth, the fifth. On his bridge, Vekris stood frozen. "What is happening?" His weapons officer checked the readings 3 times. "They have some kind of shield, Sub-Commander. It is crude and unstable, but it is absorbing our bombardment." "Impossible. They do not have shield technology. Our scans confirm this. They did not have it 2 days ago. They appear to have built it since our arrival." Vekris felt that unfamiliar feeling again, that cold sensation in his stomach. A pre-warp civilization had just invented defensive shields in less than 2 rotations. This was not in any of the protocols. This was not supposed to happen. He made a decision that would cost his species everything. Prepare ground troops. If we cannot burn them from orbit, we will crush them on the surface. No primitive species can stand against Dominion soldiers in direct combat. The dropships fell from the sky like metal rain. Thousands of Vulturi warriors, each one enhanced with genetic modifications and equipped with energy weapons that could cut through steel. They expected to face terrified civilians and primitive soldiers with outdated weapons. They expected easy victory. They were wrong. In the mountains outside Bizan, a man named Kan Hyunwoo heard the dropship screaming overhead. He'd been a hunter before the invasion. He knew these mountains like he knew his own heartbeat. Every trail, every cave, every shadow where a man could hide and wait. He gathered 23 people around him. Some were soldiers. Some were farmers. Some were students who had never held a weapon before. He gave them hunting rifles, kitchen knives, farming tools. He showed them how to make explosives from fertilizer and diesel fuel. "They have better weapons," Hyunwoo told his small group. "They have better armor. They have better training. But this is our home. These are our mountains. They do not know the land. They do not know us. And they do not know that we would rather die than kneel." The first Vulturi patrol entered his territory on a misty morning. 12 soldiers in powered armor, scanning for threats with sensors that could detect the heartbeat from a kilometer away. They were not scanning for old-fashioned rope traps. They were not scanning for rocks balanced on cliff edges. They were not expecting a farmer's daughter named Shin Nari to drop from a tree with a machete and take the head off their squad leader before anyone could react. The patrol was destroyed in 4 minutes. No survivors. Hyunwoo did not celebrate. He simply moved his people to a new position and waited for the next patrol. War was not about glory. War was about making the enemy pay for every meter of ground until they decided the cost was too high. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. In the jungles of Vietnam, in the deserts of Africa, in the frozen forests of Russia, humans fought back with whatever they had. The Vulturi had expected surrender. They got ambushes. They got traps. They got enemies who refused to stay dead, who kept fighting even when wounded, who charged into certain death just to take one more invader with them, General Park. Jisoo watched the reports flowing into her command center. The numbers were terrible. Humans were dying by the thousands every hour. Cities were burning. The shield network that Minji had built was failing in some sectors, holding in others. By any normal measure, humanity was losing. But the Valkyrie were not gaining ground. Their casualties mounted. Their supply lines stretched thin. Their soldiers, who had never faced real resistance, began to show signs of fear. Jisoo called a meeting with her command staff. "They expected us to break," she said. "They expected us to beg for mercy after the first bombardment. Instead, we are still fighting. This confuses them. This frightens them. We need to use that." A Chinese general named Wu spoke up. "Our weapons cannot penetrate their armor. Our shields are failing. How do we use their fear if we cannot hurt them?" Jisoo smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "We cannot hurt their bodies easily, but we can hurt their minds. They have never fought a war like this. They do not understand why we keep fighting when we are clearly losing. We need to make them understand that we will never stop. That there is no victory for them here. Only endless grinding, bloody war until they decide we are not worth the trouble." She issued new orders. No more conventional battles. No more defending fixed positions. From now on, every human soldier would become a ghost. Strike and vanish. Kill and disappear. Make the Valkyrie afraid to sleep, afraid to eat, afraid to take a single step on human soil. In the ruins of Tokyo, a teenage girl named Cho Yeren picked up a fallen Valkyrie weapon and taught herself how to use it. Within a week, she had killed 11 enemy soldiers. Within a month, the Valkyrie had put a bounty on her head, calling her the ghost of the Eastern District. She was 15 years old. She was not special. She was not unique. There were thousands like her, millions like her. Ordinary people who had discovered something extraordinary within themselves. Sub-Commander Vekris sent his first report to Commander Torvak after 6 weeks of fighting. The report was not what anyone in the Dominion expected. The humans refused to surrender. They refused to negotiate. They refused to flee. Every time we destroy a resistance cell, 2 more appear. Every time we secure a territory, we lose it to counterattacks within days. Our casualties are significant. I request reinforcements." Torvak read the report with growing disbelief. 6 weeks to conquer a pre-warp civilization? Significant casualties against primitives with projectile weapons. This was impossible. This was embarrassing. This was dangerous. He sent more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. He did not understand that he was already losing. He did not understand that every soldier he sent to Earth was a soldier who would never conquer another world. He did not understand that humanity had found something more powerful than technology. They had found the will to fight. And that was something the Valkyrie had never faced before. 6 months into the war, something strange began happening across the galaxy. Whispers spread through the conquered worlds like fire through dry grass. Stories that seemed impossible. Tales of a small blue planet that had said no to the Valkyrie Dominion and lived to tell about it. On the planet Maritha, a factory worker named Kellis heard the rumors and did not believe them at first. His people had surrendered to the Dominion 300 years ago. They had learned to bow their heads, to work in the mines, to give their children to the military academies where they would be turned into loyal servants. Resistance was not possible. Everyone knew this, but the stories kept coming. A species called humans. A planet called Earth. Battles that the Dominion was losing. Soldiers who were afraid to sleep. An empire that had never known defeat suddenly bleeding from a wound it could not close. Kellis began to wonder. If the humans could fight, why couldn't his people? What made Earth different from Maritha? He did not know it yet, But that question would change everything. Commander Torvak stood before the Dominion High Council on the homeworld and tried to explain the situation. His voice was steady, but sweat ran down his back beneath his uniform. The Council did not tolerate failure. The Council did not accept excuses. The humans are more resilient than anticipated, he said carefully. Their technology is primitive, but they adapt quickly. They learn from every engagement. They have begun reverse engineering our captured equipment. Our latest reports indicate they have developed functional energy shields for their ground forces. The High Chancellor leaned forward. Her eyes were cold. You told us this conquest would take 3 rotations. It has been 6 months. You have lost more soldiers on this one planet than we lost in the entire Shelkari campaign. Explain. Torvik had no good explanation. How could he describe what he had seen in the battle reports? Humans who kept fighting after losing limbs. Humans who crashed their aircraft into the minion ships rather than retreat. Humans who died with smiles on their faces if they could take even one enemy with them. They are different, he said finally. They do not respond to demonstrations of power. They do not calculate odds. They seem to believe that fighting itself has value, regardless of whether they can win. The Council exchanged glances. This was troubling. The entire Dominion system was built on the assumption that rational species would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. If a species existed that did not follow this logic, the implications were disturbing. And this, the Chancellor ordered. Whatever resources you need, however many soldiers it takes. And this before the other conquered worlds begin to wonder if they could do the same. But it was already too late for that. On Earth. A woman named Shin Yoonji stood on the deck of a converted cargo ship and watched her fleet take shape. She had been an admiral in the Korean Navy before the invasion. Now she commanded humanity's first space-capable military force. The ships were ugly. They were slow. They were held together with welded plates and desperate prayers. But they worked. Engineers from every nation had come together to build them, using stolen Velthari technology and human creativity to create something that should not have existed. They laughed at us, Yoonji told her crew. They called us primitive. They said we could never reach the stars. Today, we proved them wrong. The first human spacecraft lifted off from the Gobi Desert on a cold morning. It was not elegant. It shook and groaned and leaked atmosphere from a dozen seams. But it flew. It reached orbit. It joined the growing fleet that Yoonji had assembled. The Velthari did not believe it at first. Their sensors must be malfunctioning. These primitives could not have built spacecraft in 6 months. It was impossible. Then the first Velthari cruiser exploded, hit by missiles launched from a human ship, and they stopped laughing. Back on the ground. The war continued. Dr. Yu Minji worked in a bunker somewhere in the mountains, surrounded by captured Velthari technology and the brightest minds humanity had to offer. She had not seen sunlight in 3 months. She had forgotten what sleep felt like. But she was making progress. We cracked their communication encryption, she announced to General Park Jisoo during a video call. We can hear everything they say. We know their patrol routes, their supply schedules, their reinforcement timelines. Jisoo nodded slowly. What else? Minji hesitated. I found something in their historical databases. Something they did not want us to see. She sent the file. Jisoo read it twice, then a third time, her face showing nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet. They have never fought a war that lasted more than 1 year. In their entire history, every species they have conquered surrendered within months. They do not know how to handle a prolonged conflict. Their economy is not built for it. Their military is not trained for it. Their entire society assumes that conquest is quick and painless. They are not prepared for us, Minji said. They have no idea what they started. Jisoo began to smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just found her enemy's weakness. Get me Intelligence Officer Bae Sunho. I have a new strategy to discuss. Sunho arrived within the hour. He was a small man with tired eyes and a mind that never stopped working. He had spent the last 6 months studying captured Velthari soldiers, learning their language, understanding their psychology. They are afraid, he told Jisoo, not of dying. They have been modified to accept death. They are afraid of something worse. They are afraid of losing. Explain. The Dominion has built its entire identity on being unbeatable. Every citizen is taught from birth that they are the superior species, destined to rule the galaxy. When they lose a battle, it does not just hurt their military. It hurts their entire sense of who they are. Jisoo leaned back in her chair. So if we keep winning, their society will begin to crack. Soldiers will question their commanders. Citizens will question their leaders. Other conquered species will see that the masters are not gods. They are just another empire. And empires can fall. The plan came together over the following weeks. Humanity would not try to defeat the Velthari through direct force. They would defeat them by proving that they could be defeated. Every battle would be recorded. Every victory would be broadcast. Every drop of Velthari blood would send a message to the galaxy. The masters are mortal. The masters can bleed. The masters can lose. On Moritha, Kellis watched a grainy video of human soldiers capturing a Velthari position. He saw the fear in the enemy's eyes. He saw them run from creatures they had dismissed as primitive. Something changed inside him that day. Something that had been dead for 300 years came back to life. Hope. He began to talk to his friends, his neighbors, his co-workers in the factory. Quietly at first, carefully, but the word spread like the stories from Earth had spread. If the humans can fight, why can't we? The Dominion had awakened something they did not understand. They had spent thousands of years teaching the galaxy to fear them. Now humanity was teaching the galaxy something new. Fear can be overcome. Tyrants can be challenged. The impossible is only impossible until someone does it. The first Marathane uprising began 3 months later. Then the Chelkari rebelled. Then the Voss. Within a year, the Dominion was fighting on 17 fronts, and it all started because one small blue planet had the courage to say no. 2 years. 730 days of blood and desperate hope. Earth was scarred. Cities that had stood for centuries were gone. Coastlines had changed shape from orbital bombardment. The death toll had passed 200 million and kept climbing. But Earth was not broken. Earth would never be broken. General Park Jisoo stood in her command center, looking at a map that would have seemed like fantasy 2 years ago. Blue dots marked human positions not just on Earth, but in orbit, on the Moon, on captured Velthari stations. Red dots marked enemy positions, and there were fewer of them every day. Operation Dawn is ready, said her aide, a young man named Kwon Ji-hoon, who had been a college student when the invasion began. All units are in position. We are waiting for your order. Jisoo looked at the main screen. It showed the Velthari Regional Command Station, a massive structure floating in space between Earth and Mars. Taking it would be the most ambitious military operation in human history. Failing would mean the deaths of thousands of soldiers and the loss of ships. They could not replace Dot. She thought about the people who had died to bring them to this moment. The scientists who had worked themselves to death in underground laboratories. The soldiers who had held impossible positions so others could escape. The civilians who had picked up weapons and fought beside trained warriors. They had all sacrificed everything for this chance. She would not waste it. Begin the operation. Commander Oh Tae-young felt his stomach lurch as the assault ship accelerated toward the enemy station. He was 43 years old, a former Marine who had spent his career preparing for wars that never came. Now he was leading humanity's first offensive action against an alien empire around him. 500 soldiers checked their weapons and said silent prayers. They wore armor made from Veltri technology and human engineering. They carried rifles that fired plasma bolts alongside traditional bullets. They were the best humanity had to offer. They were also terrified. Every one of them. Tai Young could see it in their eyes. But they were going anyway, because that was what humans did. They felt fear, acknowledged it, and then did the impossible anyway. 30 seconds to contact. The pilot announced. Tae-young stood up and faced his soldiers. They told us we would never reach the stars. We reached them. They told us we would never win a battle. We won hundreds. They told us we could never threaten their positions. Look where we are now. The ship shuddered as defensive fire impacted the shields. Today we do something no species has ever done. Today we take the fight to them. Today we show the galaxy that humanity does not just survive. Humanity conquers. The airlock blew open. Tae-young was the first one through. The battle for the station lasted 16 hours. The Valkyrie defenders fought hard, but they were not prepared for the fury that came through their corridors. Human soldiers moved in perfect coordination, covering each other, sacrificing themselves to save their comrades, never retreating even when the odds turned against them. Tae-young lost half his people in the first 4 hours. He kept fighting. He had no choice. Retreat was not something humans understood anymore. When the station's commander finally surrendered, Tae-young felt nothing but exhaustion. He looked around at the bodies, human and Veltri alike, and wondered if the cost had been worth it. Then his communication officer called out, "Sir, we are receiving intelligence data from the station's computers. You need to see this." The data changed everything. Tae-young sent the files to General Jisoo immediately. She read them with growing amazement. The Veltri Dominion was not the invincible force they had pretended to be. Their economy was crumbling under the strain of a 2-year war. Their military was stretched thin across 17 rebellions. Their citizens were beginning to question their leaders for the first time in centuries. More importantly, the data contained something the Veltri had kept secret from the entire galaxy. The locations of slave camps, the names of resistance leaders on other worlds, the communication codes used by the conquered species to coordinate their uprisings. Jisoo smiled grimly. "Dr. Yoon, I need you to broadcast this to every inhabited world in the Dominion's territory. I want everyone to see that their masters are losing." The broadcast went out within hours. Images of human soldiers standing over surrendering Volthori. Data showing the Dominion's economic collapse. Messages of solidarity to every enslaved species. The response was immediate. On Maritha, the factories stopped working. On Chelkar, the slaves rose up and killed their overseers. On Voss, the puppet government collapsed overnight. The rebellions that had been burning slowly suddenly exploded into full revolution. Commander Torvak received the reports with growing desperation. Everything was falling apart. Everything he had built, everything his ancestors had built, was crumbling because of one stubborn planet that refused to know its place. He made his final decision alone, in the dark of his quarters, staring at a weapon that had been forbidden for 3,000 years. The Dominion had outlawed planet-killer devices after their own homeworld had nearly been destroyed in an ancient civil war. But desperate times required desperate measures. "Target Earth," he ordered his most loyal officers. "Destroy it completely. Perhaps that will finally teach the galaxy to fear us again." The weapon was transported in secret to a ship that appeared on no official records. It was aimed at the small blue planet that had caused so much trouble. In 12 hours, 8 billion humans would die. The rebellions would see that resistance was futile. Order would be restored. Lieutenant Choi Yuna intercepted the communication by accident. She was a fighter pilot, 26 years old, assigned to patrol duty in the outer system. Her parents had died in the first bombardment of Seoul. Her brother had been killed, defending Busan. She had nothing left except her ship and her rage. When she decoded the message, she felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, something beyond fear. Something clear and sharp like a blade. She did not call for backup. There was no time. The weapon ship was already powering up, its systems humming with enough energy to crack a planet in half. Yuna pushed her fighter to maximum speed and began her approach. The Valkyrie crew detected her when she was 200 kilometers out. A single small craft against a ship the size of a mountain. They laughed and prepared their defensive systems. Yuna did not slow down. She did not try to evade. She aimed her fighter directly at the power core, the weak point that every ship had, and she opened a channel to Earth. This is Lieutenant Choi Yuna. I am about to destroy the enemy planet killer. Tell my mother I will see her soon. She closed her eyes and thought about Seoul before the war. The lights at night. The sound of her father's laughter. The way her brother used to tease her about her cooking. The fighter struck the power core at full speed. The explosion was visible from Earth. 8 billion people lived because one woman decided that their lives were worth more than her own. That was humanity. That was what the Valkyrie had never understood and would never understand. Humans did not calculate odds. Humans did not weigh costs and benefits. When something mattered, humans gave everything. The Dominion's last hope died with that explosion. The rebellions could not be stopped. The empire that had ruled for 10,000 years began to collapse. And on Earth, people looked up at the flash in the sky and wept for a hero they would never forget. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a slow collapse. The Valkyrie Dominion, which had ruled 17 star systems for 10,000 years, simply fell apart. Their economy had been destroyed by the endless war. Their military had been broken on 100 battlefields. Their people, who had been taught since birth that they were invincible, discovered that they were not. One by one, the conquered worlds declared their independence. The Marathane threw off their chains and began rebuilding their ancient culture. The Shalkari reclaimed their homeworld and wept with joy. The Voss emerged from underground shelters where they had hidden for centuries and saw their sun for the first time. And at the center of it all was Earth. The Terran Alliance was formed 6 months after the last Valkyrie ship retreated. Representatives from every nation on Earth sat together in a new building constructed in the ruins of old Seoul. They agreed to speak with one voice to the galaxy. They agreed to protect each other and the worlds that had fought beside them. They agreed that humanity would never again be caught unprepared. Commander Torvak was captured on the Valkyrie homeworld, hiding in a bunker beneath the palace of the High Council. The Council itself had fled to parts unknown, leaving him to face the consequences of a war he had started with such arrogance. He was brought to Earth in chains to face trial for his crimes. 200 million dead. Cities burned. Lives destroyed. The weight of those numbers was beyond comprehension. The trial was held in the same building where the Terran Alliance had been founded. Representatives from every species the Dominion had conquered came to watch. The courtroom was silent as Torvak was led to his seat. Counselor Han Sujin was chosen to speak for humanity. She was 62 years old, a diplomat who had spent her life negotiating treaties that no longer mattered. The invasion had taken everything from her. Her husband had died in the bombardment of Seoul. Her 2 daughters had been killed. Defending a refugee camp in the countryside. She had every reason to demand blood. Every reason to call for the harshest punishment possible. Instead, she stood before Torvak with calm dignity and asked a simple question. Did no one warn you? Did no one in your dominion study us before you attacked? Torvag had not spoken since his capture. He had refused food, refused water, refused to acknowledge that his empire had fallen. But something in Sujin's voice reached him. Something in her quiet strength demanded an answer. "We detected your radio signals," he said slowly. "Your entertainment broadcasts. We intercepted your communications and studied your history. We saw your wars, your genocides, your weapons of mass destruction pointed at each other. We saw a species that spent most of its existence fighting itself." He paused. His hands trembled slightly against his restraints. "We thought it meant you were weak, divided. We thought your internal conflicts proved that you could not stand together against an outside threat. We thought your violence was a sign of primitiveness that we could exploit." He looked up at Sujin with something strange in his eyes. It took her a moment to recognize it as terror. Not fear of punishment. Terror of understanding. "We did not realize the truth. You were not weak. You were not divided. You were practicing. 10,000 years of war against each other had made you into the most dangerous species in the galaxy. You knew how to fight. You knew how to sacrifice. You knew how to hate, and how to love, and how to die for something greater than yourselves." He shook his head slowly. "We gave you a reason to unite. We gave you a common enemy. We took your greatest weakness and turned it into your greatest strength. We did not conquer you. We forged you." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Sujin nodded once. "The tribunal will consider your words." She turned to the assembled judges. "I recommend that the prisoner be sentenced to witness. He will travel to every world his dominion conquered. He will see the people he enslaved now living free. He will watch the civilizations he tried to destroy rebuild and flourish. He will spend the rest of his life understanding exactly what his arrogance has cost." The sentence was accepted. Torvak was led away, his face blank with the magnitude of his punishment. Death would have been easier. Death would have been an escape. Instead, he would spend his remaining years watching the galaxy celebrate the fall of everything he believed in. Humanity took its place among the stars in the years that followed. They were not conquerors. They had seen too much war to enjoy it. Instead, they became protectors, liberators, the species that had learned to fight so that others would not have to dot other. Civilizations looked at humans with complicated feelings. There was gratitude, yes, admiration for what they had accomplished. But there was also something else, a quiet wariness. An understanding that humans were capable of things that other species could barely imagine. Humans were kind. They were generous and curious and eager to make friends across the galaxy. But everyone remembered what had happened when they were threatened. Everyone remembered that the gentle creatures who built hospitals and schools and shared their technology freely were the same creatures who had burned an empire to the ground. 10 years after the war ended, a young Velthari diplomat named Keseth traveled to Earth for the first time. His people had surrendered their weapons and their territory. They were rebuilding, slowly, as a minor power in a galaxy that no longer feared them. Keseth visited the Sol Memorial on a quiet afternoon. The monument stood where the first bombardment had fallen, a garden of flowers growing among stones that bore the names of the dead. 200 million names. It would take a lifetime to read them all. An elderly woman was tending the flowers when he arrived. Her name was Moonhound, and she had been a child when the invasion began. She had survived the burning of Seoul by hiding in a basement with her mother. She had grown up in the refugee camps, fought as a teenager, watched the war end as a young woman. Now she spent her days caring for the memorial. Keseth approached her carefully. He knew that some humans still hated his species. He would not blame her if she asked him to leave. Instead, she smiled and offered him a pair of gardening gloves. "You look like you could use something to do with your hands," she said. They worked together in silence for a while. Kesseth pulled weeds while Hound planted new flowers. The sun was warm on his back. The soil smelled of life and growth. Finally, he asked the question that had brought him across the galaxy. What do you remember from that first day? Hound sat back on her heels and looked at the sky. Her eyes were distant, seeing something far away in time. I remember the light, so bright that I thought the sun had exploded. I remember the sound, like thunder that never stopped. I remember being so afraid that I could not move. She paused. Her hands were still now, resting in the dirt. And then I remember my mother. She heard the explosions. She saw the fire falling from the sky. And do you know what she did? Kesseth shook his head. She picked up a kitchen knife. Just a small thing meant for cutting vegetables. And she walked toward the door. I asked her where she was going. She said, "They made a mistake coming here." Hound smiled at the memory. My mother was not a soldier. She had never fought anyone in her life. But in that moment, she was ready to fight aliens with a kitchen knife. Because that is what humans do. When something threatens what we love, we fight. We do not ask if we can win. We simply fight. Kesseth looked at the memorial, at the flowers growing in the ashes, at the old woman who had survived horrors he could barely imagine and still found the strength to plant gardens. He thought about his ancestors, about the arrogance that had led them to attack this world, about the hundreds of thousands of Veltari soldiers who had died learning a lesson that should have been obvious from the start. You attacked Earth, he whispered to the ghosts of his people. His voice was barely audible. What were you thinking? Hound reached over and patted his hand gently. They were not thinking. That was the problem. They saw our weapons and our wars and thought they understood us. They did not realize that our violence was not a weakness. It was a warning. A sign that said, "We will protect what is ours." She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. Come, I will show you the rest of the memorial. There is a wall where we have written the names of every species that fought beside us. Your people are rebuilding. Someday, perhaps, the Veltari will have their own names on a wall somewhere. Names of those who helped others instead of conquering them. Kesseth followed her through the garden, past monuments and flowers and the endless names of the dead. He thought about the future, about what his people could become if they learned from their mistakes. Above them, human ships crossed the sky, carrying aid to distant worlds and protection to those who needed it. The species that had been dismissed as primitive and violent had become the guardians of the galaxy. Because in the end, humans had been right about one thing. They did not know how to surrender. They did not know how to give up. They only knew how to survive, and they had made sure that the entire galaxy would remember that lesson forever.